So I'd say the most surprising vegan food experiences I've had while traveling, one was Budapest. I really didn't think I would find much vegan or even vegetarian options in Eastern Europe, but there were so many vegan restaurants and they were really good, including ones that had authentic Hungarian food. And I'd say Mexico City was also really surprising, really amazing cuisine there. Some of the best chefs, and their vegan restaurants were incredible. They all had their own unique twist on traditional dishes, which was really nice to experience. And my favorite's probably been Bali. Staying in Canggu, where there's so many vegan restaurants just like in walking distance, or even in Ubud, was one of the most fun experiences I had. And being able to experience a new local cuisine, like what nasi goreng is like in a vegan form, was really fun.
Hi everyone, I'm Shelly Goel, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this Humans of YJA Plus Fireside Chat. While Humans of YJA has focused on spotlighting young voices within our community, YJA Plus expands that lens to include individuals and organizations who embody Jain values in their work and lives. Through these conversations, we hope to explore how our values show up in many different spaces, professionally, spiritually, and personally. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Priyanka Shah, a former West Regional Coordinator for Young Jains of America, a practicing PA, and the creator behind Pinki's Palate. From her work in medicine to the way she shares Jain-inspired plant-based recipes, Priyanka brings a very thoughtful and intentional approach to everything she does. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Priyanka.
Thanks for having me.
So I know traditionally many Jains tend to follow a lacto-vegetarian diet, which means there is the consumption of dairy still within our diets. And, you know, historically, traditionally, that's kind of what we have learned. But now there's a huge global shift in terms of going vegan, and we've also kind of seen this in our YJA community as well. For instance, I just attended West Retreat, and our food was not only fully Jain, but it was also fully vegan. The 2024 convention also had fully Jain and vegan food, and so we're seeing, you know, this pop up, and it's super exciting. But I guess I wanted to ask you specifically. I know you grew up eating Jain, but this is also a shift that you personally decided to take, where you decided to incorporate not only Jain recipes, but also include veganism in that conversation as well. So what really inspired that change, and what kind of advice would you give to people who are also trying to go more Jain and more vegan friendly?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say that as I was on this food blogging journey and doing a lot of research about the food industry and where our food comes from, I really started to question and learn a little bit more about the dairy industry, and realized there was so much that I just didn't know. And I never had taken the time to learn about it. I think a lot of us in our community, and just people who are vegan curious in general, we have that as an aspiration, but there's still this element of cognitive dissonance that can be really challenging. And I went through that myself, where I know there's probably something not right about it, but I just haven't taken the step to really educate myself. And when I did that, that really created an internal shift for me. And as somebody who grew up eating a very strict Jain diet, learning, we're trying to avoid even, one sense living beings, microorganisms, and these root vegetables, I started to question how the dairy industry was treating these 5 sense living beings, these cows, and how it just didn't make sense to be ignorant towards the cruelty and the suffering that they go through in the time we live in right now. So I think that made the biggest shift for me, and that planted the seed that I wanted to go vegan. And for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, sustainable changes take time. And it's not going to be always overnight. And sometimes taking that time actually builds that confidence and allows you to really incorporate it into your lifestyle as a practice. Because veganism isn't just about food, right? Just like in Jainism, Ahimsa applies to so many more things, the way we interact with our environment, people around us. So for me, it took a little, I'd say about a year to really make the complete shift. But I started by, one item at a time, substituting milk for soy milk or almond milk. And then next was yogurt. So going an item by item really was a way that I could keep my lifestyle, in the sense that the recipes I like, the foods I enjoy, the way that I interact with people at dinner parties or lunches and things like that, it allowed me to create my same recipes, but in a vegan form. So I'd say that was the way that I made a sustainable change.
Yeah, I really, really love your point on how it's not something that just happens overnight. I think for me personally as well, I was kind of inspired by similar things where I had friends who had gone vegan, but also in terms of just, I think there were a bunch of documentaries I had seen about just like the violence in the dairy industry, and that's just something that didn't sit really well. But it was also like the sort of shift that really did not happen overnight. It was like first like replacing milk, and then okay, can I replace like ghee in my and then cheese was another thing. But it's like taking these incremental steps, and then also just having the support of friends and family and other community, I think really helps. But it's also, you know, it's not like an all or nothing shift. It's more of how can we be really intentional about practicing ahimsa in whatever form that might be, whether it's food or other practices. And so I think hearing kind of your journey and hearing how you went step by step in approaching that and achieving that is really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Priyanka, I would love to hear kind of more about what was like your family's reaction or broader community's reaction when you decided to first go vegan. I know that there's within even our culture itself, there's a lot of practices that still do involve dairy. And I'm wondering, you know, from your perspective, did you sometimes find it challenging or find a struggle in trying to communicate, you know, your shift to not only eating Jain, but now also eating vegan and explaining that to your broader community? And then I think another follow-up question to that would be just in general for someone who is thinking about making this shift, how would you advise that they best kind of explain their transition to maybe eating Jain, maybe eating vegan, to people who may not necessarily understand that perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually, when I went vegan, I had just moved back home from grad school, and my family did have a tough time kind of adjusting to it. You know, my mom loves to cook, and she's always like fed us delicious meals growing up, and showing her ways that we can easily substitute certain ingredients in the dishes she normally makes was my approach to helping kind of integrate that, since we still ate as a family. I think for a long time they didn't really know how to do it themselves. So I think being an advocate in that way, like, you know, if we were making like mutton paneer, I'd just bring home a block of tofu and be like, let's use this instead of paneer. Or sometimes they would make mine separately. But I am still the only vegan in my family. I think I've inspired them to be more open-minded towards vegan recipes and, you know, trying to make these substitutions. But, you know, everybody has their own journey. And I think that as a Jain and as somebody who's gone through that journey myself, it's really important to recognize that not everybody's going to understand and everybody has their own perspective on it. So being respectful both ways is really important. And then when it came to my friends as well, I think that, you know, whenever I would go to a dinner party or if somebody was hosting, most of my friends were pretty accommodating, and I've been really lucky with that. So oftentimes if it is a potluck, I'll bring a vegan dish myself, so I know there's something I can eat, but they're always really thoughtful in asking me, like, what are some things I can make? Can you send me a recipe that you like? So I really appreciate that too. And, you know, now being married as well, like with my in-laws and my in-laws family, they have a very like mixed diet type of family, like so many different dietary practices. Not everyone is vegetarian in their family. Some people are gluten-free, and then I'm vegan. So I think luckily they were used to making accommodations for different people, but they've also been really sweet and open-minded towards my practices. And if we're having a pizza night, they'll have my vegan cheese there. Or if it's a party, they actually bring like a separate vegan cake sometimes, which I think is really sweet. But again, not expected at all, but I really appreciate that. People are open-minded, accommodating, and respectful. And I think as long as we, as like vegans ourselves, are approaching it in a respectful way, people will reciprocate that.
No, I really, really liked your emphasis on, I think, that respect going in two directions. One is, obviously, it's incredible to have a community of people around us that support that. For me too, when I'd gone vegan, like having that conversation with my parents, I think they were supportive of it, right? But like trying to figure out how do we go about replacing so many ingredients in our like normal Indian cooking, like ghee or milk that have been used for such a long time was definitely a harder transition. But, you know, between my family and friends, like they really were excited about my journey. And I think through that, it also inspired me to continue putting in more and more steps to going vegan. And I think at the same time, like the conversation about, like what we choose to practice versus like the people around us, like I think, there's a lot of knowledge to give and share, but at the same time, like really understanding and respecting that everyone has their own perspectives. And again, right, in a nutshell. And that as long as we're being respectful of the people around us, and, we're feeling like the support of our community, like that in itself is such a beautiful thing to kind of have.
Absolutely. And I'd say that for me personally, when I approach veganism, I think I use food as my form of activism. I think it's a very kind and peaceful way to introduce somebody to the lifestyle, and also share that, it doesn't really have to taste that different, or it's not that you're missing something, but there are other ways of creating something that's enjoyable that doesn't have to include the suffering of any living beings.
1,000%. Yeah. I love making like chai for friends. And so initially when we kind of started this, like it would be more milk based. And so then as I was going vegan, I started incorporating and soy milk and things. And I think my friends were honestly just super excited about that. And it came from like that place of, like this is something we haven't had before. This is new,
the novelty.
But it's like super exciting. I think vegan recipes in general have such a room for creativity. Would also love to hear more about that of just, I know in general with like the Jain and vegan diet, a lot of people might see that as more of a restrictive diet or more of a limiting factor, but I'm really curious to see what your take is on that. I know in a lot of your recipes, you have really creative takes for taking something that might be a more traditional recipe and kind of putting your own spin on it. And I think, in general, like for me, going vegan has been something super exciting because I've realized I'm just trying more and more new recipes that I might have not tried before. And so, would love to hear your thoughts on kind of how do you, approach both the recipes you're making and then just in a broader sense of the creativity behind following both the Jain and vegan diet.
Yeah, so I think it's really easy to fall into the mindset when you're changing your diet or changing a lifestyle that something's missing, that you've taken something out. But for me, I tried to shift my mindset when I was approaching vegan cooking and my transition to veganism as looking at it in form of abundance. Like there are all these things, there's like so many vegetables, so many fruits, nuts, grains, everything that we can use to create something new. And I think, like you said, the novelty of having something that you haven't had before is exciting to people, whether they're vegan or not. So being able to use that abundance mindset and kind of start from scratch a little bit and think of foods that I loved growing up and easily find swaps to make it vegan. Or, as an Indian American and growing up, being born and raised here, there are a lot of, flavors and foods that are core to me from being American as well as Indian, and being able to blend, different cuisines and create these fusion recipes, I think was a really fun way of bringing that novelty too.
So Pinki's Palate first originated kind of as a personal project. And since then, like this community has really grown. This is like a global community now. What used to start off with like recipes you're posting has now changed into almost like a lifestyle. And so I'm so curious to kind of hear about what that journey has meant for you. And then also, what are maybe some surprising or significant milestones that you felt you had achieved during that process?
Yeah. So I'd say like one of the most exciting things that's come out of building this brand is when people message me and share like that they've made the recipe that I posted, or how the recipes or any content that I've shared has really impacted them on their journey. It makes me feel like it's like kind of full circle, like this is actually working. When you post something out on social media otherwise, like, people are watching, but you never really know what the impact of it is. So I love receiving that feedback. Some exciting opportunities that did come up in the recent past years. I did get to be part of a couple documentaries, which was really fun to be able to share the Jain and vegan diet with people outside of our community and bring some more advocacy and just knowledge about it. So I got to be part of Topic.com's eating series, where they featured different types of diets from people around the country, as well as Pearson Education's segment on Jainism in their textbook series. So that was really fun. I think one of the most exciting things that happens was when I'm, just like, out in the community, or even when I'm traveling and people come up to me like, "Are you Pinky's Palate?" I'm like, "Oh, wow, you actually know me." So that's always really fun to get recognized. Again, I am like nowhere near the growth that I'd love to be at, but I think it's a journey. And for me, I've taken it as something that I want to grow, but I also want it to stay authentic. And like you said, I think authenticity comes when you're creating content that you really believe in. So even in the influencer culture that we see a lot of like product promotion and overconsumption, it's just not something that I've really, bought into, because I feel like that would kind of take away from my purpose. And the partnerships I've had, I really like to focus on ones that I truly believe in, and I feel like I have a shared ethos with that company or that product, and that I feel like could benefit my viewers and people who follow me too.
Yeah, I love, like, even when the platform is so big, what's really significant to you are just those like individual interactions you're having with people. And I think it's such a cool way to just see the impact that you're having, like in the social media space, but just even in these like one-on-one interactions. And yeah, I think it's like incredibly inspiring, the community that you've kickstarted, and then also like it just like spreads more and more and more, right? Like when one person gets inspired to go vegan, they then talk to their communities, and so you're just building this beautiful community overall. And then even in all of this, really maintaining like the authenticity and just how your life has evolved in the process of establishing Pinky's Palate, and then going through not only the journey of the blog itself, but your own journey personally. Again, extremely cool to kind of see, and super inspiring.
Thanks.
I know many of us currently are kind of in the stage of life where we're meeting people, we're dating, and in that process, obviously food is something that plays a really big part, especially with dietary choices that people have. So I guess for you, you grew up Jain and then you turned vegan. I'm really curious if, your partner also grew up eating Jain or was vegan, or if not, then what was that transition like? What were those conversations like? What challenges might have come up there? And then even more broadly, maybe your partner's family or your family, kind of what were the reactions of communities to that as well?
Yeah. So, I think for a long time in my 20s, I always thought I needed to find somebody who was exactly the same as me, following a Jain diet and grew up Jain. And I realized through those relationships that that's not always what makes you compatible. And having a foundation that's based on mutual respect is probably the most important, even if you come from different upbringings. And most of us do. Like nobody, even in the Jain community, nobody's going to have the same exact upbringing and same exact practices in their home. And as I learned that, I myself became a little more open-minded and realized that I needed to find somebody that had that mutual respect and that understanding and wanting to be supportive of each other as like the primary focus. And my partner is not vegan and he's not Jain. He grew up Hindu. And when we first started dating, I think we had a lot of good conversations about my lifestyle practice. He knew how much, cooking meant to me and Pinky's Palate, and how important my lifestyle has been being a Jain and being a vegan. And he did exhibit curiosity, which I really appreciated. He wanted to learn more about it. And, now that we're married and we're living together, we always have that understanding as our foundation. And most of the time we're cooking and eating together. So a lot of the time we're cooking vegan at home and eating vegan. And he is vegetarian, which makes it a little bit easier as well. But, if we're making something where it's like pizza, for example, and he wants to have cheese, we just have our two separate cheeses. But otherwise, I think he's been really flexible, which I really appreciate. And I think I would advise anybody in that phase of life who is exploring their relationship to make sure that you have that mutual understanding and really advocate for what means the most to you. And for me, this was like a very core principle. So he understood that and he's been really respectful of it.
So you recently hit a huge milestone. You got married, so huge congrats on that.
Thanks.
And what's incredible is that I heard that your wedding was 100% Jain and vegan, which is so incredible for something at such a large scale. And I think we would love to just hear about what that process was like. Is that something from the beginning you knew you really wanted to do? What was that conversation like with your partner and your families? And just, I think in general, like what did that planning process look like? Because I'm sure it must have been a lot of work and there must have been challenges along the way as well. So we'd just love to hear how that entire journey was for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. This is like a really big topic I've been wanting to talk about. But yeah, so I did get married last year. Our wedding was in India, in Rajasthan. And, initially I thought like, oh yeah, Jain foods can be super easy to do in India, but I didn't realize how hard vegan food is in India. It's still, while we have so many vegan alternatives here, it's still up and coming there. So that definitely presented a challenge. Initially, when I brought up the idea, before we even decided where we were going to get married, I discussed with my husband now how important this was for me, and that this was like my one opportunity to not only be sharing like recipes online, but actually firsthand letting people experience it, and letting people experience it who probably have never had vegan food in their lives. We had multiple generations of family at our wedding, so it was a really special opportunity for me, and one of the biggest events that I'll ever have in my life. And I felt like it was like the one opportunity I'd get to do something like this. And when I thought about it, we had about 200 guests over 3 days, and if you count 3 meals a day, that's like 1,800 meals.
Wow.
Where you have the opportunity to reduce harm to any living being, as well as open people's eyes to what vegan food can be, and the creativity and the taste, all while keeping it Jain too. So my husband was really supportive of that, which I was really grateful for, because I think that's like the first link that you need with any aspect of wedding planning, is to be on the same page as your partner. When we did present it to our parents, though, it was a bit challenging. I think their vision was, we could just have like a vegan station or a vegan table. And I'm like, well, I'm also getting married, so I want to be able to eat everything at my wedding. Exactly. But I really tried to share my reasoning and how this was that one opportunity in my life to really be able to have such a large impact, and share vegan food with so many people. And it took some time, and it took a lot of advocacy from me, and also kind of that guarantee, like, as long as the food is good, nobody's going to care. As long as it tastes good, everybody's going to enjoy it. And the next part that was actually really hard was finding a caterer who would be willing to do a fully Jain, fully vegan, set of food. And weddings in India, you have so many dishes. Yeah. It's crazy how many things we had on our menu. But a lot of the caterers in India, they're very used to doing Jain weddings and like fully Jain cooking. And Jain food there is like amazing too. But very few of them have done vegan, and of that, very few have done, I don't even think any of them have really done vegan and Jain together for a full set. And we had, over hundreds of dishes throughout the whole event. So I worked by pitching to these caterers and trying to advocate, like, no, I think this will be really like a great, thing for you guys to do for your business as well as for our event. And I really went through what they had as like their normal menus and kind of went through and suggested modifications, gave them a list of things they can substitute from their normal recipes to make it vegan, and helped curate that menu alongside the caterers to really make this be something that can come to life. So we finally had a caterer who was actually one of the top caterers in the area, who agreed to doing it. And oh my gosh, this is the one time that I wish I was a guest at my own wedding, because the food was absolutely amazing, and I only wish that I had more opportunity to eat more of it. But a lot of our guests had no idea that I was vegan, and some of them knew that I was vegan, but I think a lot of my extended family in India probably had no idea. But honestly, everybody raved about the food, and when they were told that, did you know the food is vegan, they were shocked. So I think I accomplished my goal with being able to open people's eyes to how delicious Jain vegan cooking can be. And it was also something that really felt like probably my biggest milestone as somebody who's been in this like food blogging and recipe curation space for a while, that I was actually able to directly share this with people and, change their perspective and change their mind about what vegan food can be.
I love that. I mean, I think a lot of times with like weddings, obviously, it's about the couple, but like the conversation can sometimes shift to like the broader family or community.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate how much you kind of advocated for something that was so meaningful to you. And in the sense, like the impact that creates, right? You were sharing that with like the 1800 meals. And these are people that you love and cherish, that your partner loves and cherishes, and to be able to kind of just show to them what you practice on a day-to-day living, like I'm sure must have been very inspiring to them as well. And then at the end of the day, right, it's like if the food is good, like it's like a great opportunity for them to not only enjoy the wedding, but also to kind of learn about something new and something different. So that I think was super exciting. And then just the other part of like how you're working so closely with the caterers and really, giving them suggestions for what are new takes you can take, how this is going to help their own business. And I'm just like thinking about what that's kind of opened up in terms of other people who might be really interested in having a Jain and vegan wedding, but have not found that avenue yet, especially in holding a wedding in India, for instance, and like the impact that now you're having on countless more future weddings and couples down the road, because you've kind of kickstarted that conversation. And not only in just the sense of like how you've been doing this through Pinki's Palate, your blog, now you're also impacting local communities as well, and that's again so inspiring to kind of see. And it's again, congrats on your huge milestone.
Thanks.
And it's so cool to kind of see it play out so concretely.
Thank you. Yeah.
So from when it first originated to now, Pinki's Palate has really transformed from being something that was more, food-based and recipe-based to now something that more embodies this idea of compassionate living. So we'd just kind of love to hear about what do you like to now focus on currently, maybe even beyond just like the Jain and vegan diet, and then also on your day-to-day living, what are practices that you like to incorporate? What are ways that you like to practice mindfulness? And then just do you have kind of advice for how we can incorporate those elements beyond maybe just a dietary element?
Yeah, definitely. So I like to say that compassionate living is very much mindfulness in a whole sense. With any practice during the day, any routine, whether you're going grocery shopping or you are prepping a meal or you're just like brushing your teeth, being conscious of what we're using and what we need is something that I think we can implement compassion into any action. So when it comes to food, especially, it's not just about what foods you're eating, but like how are you preparing it? Are you being more mindful when you're cutting open a bell pepper and there's not an insect in it? And these things just kind of become part of your lifestyle. It's not something that I now need to consciously think about every time, but as it's been part of my lifestyle, it's something that I do pay attention to. Also, when it comes to purchasing things, we live in a society where we're doused with different ads and told that we need things that we may not. And while I wouldn't say I'm a minimalist, I think I am really conscious about things that I purchase and things that I actually use and need. And trying to maintain that throughout my lifestyle. So I'd say those are kind of main areas. Additionally, I'd say that compassionate living to me is also how we interact with people around us in our own homes as well as around the world. I think that being compassionate with the way we approach conflict or differences really makes a difference in how those conversations go on and how we can live more peacefully. And between myself and my husband, I think that's something that we really try to embody and just think in that other person's shoes, or like having that multiplicity of viewpoints, that Anagantwad principle in mind whenever there is something that we may have differing opinions about. Other ways that I incorporate compassionate living is also in my hobbies and in my passions. So one of the things I really love to do is travel. I've had the opportunity to live abroad in 3 different countries and really experience different cultures. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, in being able to interact with locals, understand their culture and approach it not from any judgmental perspective, but just understanding where they come from and how it impacts their decisions and their way of thinking. I think it makes us open-minded people in general when we explore different types of, regions, people and practices and culture. So I'm really passionate about that, and I think we can approach that with compassion when we're traveling, and really taking the time to understand people around you, and not just kind of going on vacation just for the sake of going on vacation, but with that intention. So those are some things I really enjoy incorporating that compassionate lifestyle into.
I think just hearing about, obviously, going vegan or going Jain is a very concrete way of practicing Ahimsa, and it's an example that really comes to mind even when someone thinks about Jainism. Like, a lot of times people will be like, oh yeah, I've heard of the Jain diet before. But the way I think you live your life, in which, yes, this is one way you practice this, but more than that, every interaction you're having, how you're communicating with other people, the hobbies you're doing, you approach things with such intentionality and care. And I think that in itself is such a good point for all of us to keep in mind. Is there's so many different ways to practice, like Ahimsa, Briga, and Ekantvad, and it's just a matter of being intentional about it, being mindful of how we're treating the people and the souls around us in a broader sense. And it's again really fascinating to hear how you approach that in the smallest of activities you're doing on a daily basis to even more larger ones, and the impact that whatever action you kind of take, that impact that kind of has.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess what's next for Pinki's Palate? Do you have any exciting projects or opportunities coming up ahead? And then in general, what is maybe some advice that you would like to give to our broader YJ community?
Yeah, there is some really exciting things coming up. I won't say yet, but stay tuned. And one of my long-standing dreams for Pinki's Palate has always been to write a cookbook. It's still in the back burner, but still something I'm thinking about. And I'd love to have something physical that people can have in their hands, and be able to continue to share more recipes, but also just how to incorporate mindful activities in your day-to-day life with those recipes. I'd say advice for anyone in the YJA community who is interested in pursuing some sort of creative endeavor is to really just jump right in. Don't feel like you have to be at a certain number of followers or a certain platform to really be able to make an impact. Even if you influence just one person with whatever you're passionate about and advocating for, I think it makes a huge difference, and things just ripple. This journey started with just posting really poorly plated but delicious recipes on Facebook, and it's grown and expanded. And just as your journey evolves, so will your creative endeavor, and you'll be able to take people along that journey, which is the most special way to connect.
Super excited for your cookbook. I will be following you and making sure I'm able to pre-order that as soon as that's available, and very excited for all your opportunities ahead. And above all, I just wanted to say again a huge thank you for taking this time to talk with us today. Your journey is so incredibly inspiring, getting to have this conversation today and just hear about all the ways that you kind of embrace this modern, compassionate lifestyle, and everything you do, originating from Pinki's Palate and then going even further beyond that, and then just, I think, larger, how the lifestyle you live resonates with so many people, and the impact you've had on such a broad community. Again, thank you so much for being here and for having this conversation, and really just for inspiring all of us.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really special.